Servus YouTube, Chef here, back at it again, this time with the update on the Bleeding Edge build with the patch version 1.0.8. This build is focused around consistent DPS, that is the reason why we are dropping ailments. Currently the most powerful passive node in the game is Immortal Offering. This passive node alone can give us up to 175% additional damage, with the emphasis on the additional. More on that in the passive section. The only problem that this node has, it's extremely inconsistent. Not only do you need minions to trigger it, but also getting the stacks of every element is quite a hassle. So with that in mind, we try to get other additional damage which is easier to proc. As a result, this build has slower clear but way faster and smoother boss killing potential. As you can see, it takes us around 30 seconds to kill level 187 bosses. But yeah, let's go over the details and the passive skills, items and attribute sections. Passives. This is the finalized tree. Keep in mind that on the left side you can turn the wheels. So please align the rings like I have them. From the middle to the south in the first ring we have the Sentinel. The second one we have Warmonger and Ranger, and in the third one Siegebreaker and Alastor. This character is also only level 81, so with the final 9 points I would get Residual Energy, where we are also missing one more item, more details on the item section there, and the 2 maximum Willpower and Rage nodes here, and 2 cooldown reduction here and here. Critical nodes in this build are, as mentioned, Residual Energy and Beacon for the Lost. These are additional damage types which make them extremely potent, and they can also be triggered fairly easy. With Beacon for the Lost we have to stay below 50% of our maximum force shield, which is extremely easy since we get hit all the time and we do not have any energy shield leech. We also have one skill that empties our energy shield completely. This is giving us 35% in total. On the right here I got my total damage numbers while above 50% force shield and my total damage below 50% force shield. As you can see, it makes a huge difference. Then we could also get 30% additional damage from Residual Energy, which we can also roll on our rings with 15% each. So if we have the unique item the Veiled Eclipse, our damage would be even higher. Sadly, I haven't managed to drop them yet, but the build is still able to clear 187 even without best in slot gear. We focus around crit damage because it multiplies our total damage and additional damage, grabbing every single crit damage node in the passive tree here in the Soldier, then Merciless Lethality, 2 nodes in the White Arrow node and 2 nodes in the Siegebreaker. Here we also get 2 defensive nodes with Salvatory Anchor, doubling our flat all res from chest and helmet. This is the reason why we have to get a heavy one, more detail on that in the item section. And we are also getting Disallowing Vessel with the node behind it, Secure Parry, giving us 100% increased all res. The 60% damage increase we get from Disallowing Vessel is almost nothing since it's not additional damage. So if you don't like the decrease in movement speed, feel free to drop it in favor for other all-res nodes. Another defensive node we pick up is Dire Juncture. It's making it so we only take 40 and 60% damage from a hit at a time, preventing us from getting one-shot. And the last defensive nodes are Block Chance and Efficiency in the Praetorian and in Arms Maester. The last few offensive nodes are Clandestine in the Assassins for boss DPS and Frenzied Blows in the Child of Fury. This only triggers once we are above 750 rage, that is the reason why we pick up maximum rage in the Warlock and in the Scholartree. And we also do get acute tracking, even though this one doesn't trigger often, but we really only care about the crit damage next to it. I will now go over which points to take when leveling. First we want to rush down into the Siegebreaker, grabbing Salvatory for the increase in defense, basically making us immortal in the early game. We're also grabbing a Life Leech with Feast for the Crows. Then we start the second part in the Soldier, grabbing all the crit damage and crit chance. Into the Assassin's Tree for Merciless Lethality for even more crit damage. Then we make our way over into Dire Junction. so we don't get one shot by bosses. By now we should have one gear piece that has maximum force shield on it. Now we go into the EOS, grabbing Beacon for the Lost. After that we go into Arms Meister, grabbing block chance, 10% here, 6% there, 10% here, and we also get Proud Reprisal. This will deal weapon damage on a block and also trigger life leech. We also get more block chance in the Praetorian. Then we go into the Child of Fury. Our Frenzied Blows. Grabbing now the maximum resource and also the cost reduction and maximum resource here. Then once we level up further, we finish off the tree with crit damage here and crit damage in the White Arrow and crit damage in the Siegebreaker. That's where we get more block efficiency here, more melee weapon damage and attack damage here. Those are 16%, the other ones are only 10%. We grab the additional boss damage here, the 5% crit damage here, and then the last 10 points from level 80 to 90 I would either spend to grab residual energy in the Warlock if we have the unique, the Wield Eclipse, or I would spend them to get the last few damage nodes in here, in the Warmonger, grabbing all the melee weapon damage, attack damage, and then also over here with 45% material damage in the Exorcist. Skills. Bleeding Edge. Wolcen Studio absolutely destroyed the modifier momentum. They added cost, a cooldown, and reduction in weapon damage. This is what made this skill extremely strong in the past, since you could cast it once and it would deal damage 9 times. But we have another modifier that does almost the same thing with Astral Orbit. This will make it so it deals damage 4 times, and that is one of the reasons why it's so much better than any other melee skill. Because first of all, Bleeding Edge has the highest weapon damage since it gains 1.5% per level, compared to Slayer's Flurry with 0.3%, and then that gets multiplied by 4 because of this modifier. That's the reason we take self-adjusting. This increases it to 4 hits from 3, and all the other modifiers are for damage and cost reduction. Check it out. This is the skill with which we manually empty our force shield with the modifier Perpetual Osmosis. Another important modifier is Cold Steel to reduce the cooldown, and the other ones are just about preference. Flight of Ga-Vanir with Inspiring Throw for a damage buff, Howl of Battle for reach generation, and Drums for movement speed, and all the other ones are for damage. So a range out, this is just a filler. I don't like this skill whatsoever, it just has way too long of an animation. We would swap this for Winter's Grass, convert it into Shadow if we had the unique pants Wield Eclipse. Reducing the cooldown with these modifier and also getting a damage buff with Hail the Ice Queen. Warpath is our movement ability to quickly move from one end of the map to the other with Fortune Path and Sprinting. It also gives us a decent buff through Vexilloid, increasing our resistances, and Mania and Burning Lifeblood giving us Rage. And the last modifier is optional. I'm going with Marrow Eater, since Inflexible Stance is currently not working. And the last skill, again for movement and buffing ourselves, Wings of Ishmir, removing the cooldown on it through Relentless and making it faster with Lightspeed. Damage buff comes from Apparatus and Crew. And Onslaught is also a very good one, it gives us additional rage. The last modifier is optional, I'm going with Heavy Impalement. Items. As always, stats are posted from most to least important. We are using a two-handed greatsword. This one has the highest base damage of all the weapon types. Then we are looking for % material damage increase because it scales all of our other flat damage increases and our gems, which then count as flat damage, which scales with all of our other damage increases, for example 600% from attributes and the other 300 to 400 from our passives. Then we want flat fizz, flat rend or toxic damage to attacks, critical damage, life leech and attack speed. Rings, we're looking for the steel category because those have added crit damage. Then we're looking for % material damage increase, because we get so much flat damage from our two-handed weapon that % damage increases are actually more potent than flat damage increases. After that we want crit damage, % transfer time reduction, and flat damage added to attacks. If we have the unique pants, then we also want the Carousel FX attacks gain damage from the last spell cast. This scales with our total attack damage, not with spell damage, and it is additional damage, which means it would be extremely potent. Then an Omnistar amulet with all the other affixes like the rings. And last accessory, a unique belt, the trial. This applies mark on any hit we do. If you have this belt, choose all the modifiers on Mark of Impurity by duplicating it. The trial belt will then apply all the modifiers from all duplications. If you don't have it, go with a champion belt with the affixes from all the other accessories. Helmet and chest. The most important thing here is that it is in the heavy category and that it has flat all resistance and % all resistance score on it. Then we're also looking for transfer time reduction, flat ferocity, and % material damage. Hence the unique one, Wield Eclipse. This would allow us to cast Winter's Grass converted into Shadow, which would enable us to trigger Residual Energy, which is another additional damage buff. If you also don't have it like me, go with normal pants. For all the other armor types, we're looking for either Bruiser or Rogue category. But make sure that you have at least one of them, because if you have 0 force shield, Beacon for the Lost will not trigger. With that said, I would recommend about 5000 force shield, so we have it up 100% of the time. Then stats on pants, we are looking for transfer time reduction, flat ferocity, % material damage, flat health, and % health increase. Boots with the same stats as the pants, with the only exception that we want movement speed instead of transfer time reduction. Shoulders and gloves, same again in the either Bruiser or Rogue category, with the most important stat, cost reduction. Since Frenzied Blows is doubling our cost on Bleeding Edge, this is very important. Then we're also looking for flat ferocity, % material damage, flat health, and % health. Champs. On offensive we want tier 1 with rubies in them for more flat damage. Defensive also with tier 1 with Alexandrites for block chance. And then on rings with either support tier 3 with amethysts for transfer time reduction. If you have enough rolled on that on gear, then go with support 2 with rubies for more damage. Attributes. I recommend enough points into toughness to have at least 50k HP, and then the rest of the points all into ferocity. Now that you know how the build functions, let's see it in action. We are going to do a level 187 expedition. And yeah, like I said, the clear speed on this build is not the best, but what we are really focused around is killing the bosses. Without needing to have minions next to them to trigger the trial belt to deal maximum HP explosions that also crit. That one is super powerful, that is probably the next thing they're gonna nerf. And if I had to guess, Immortal Offering, since like I said, it gives us 175% additional damage. As you can see, we're super tanky because of our 100% block chance, where we also deal damage to enemies once they hit us. Which means on normal minions we instantly leech our life back. We also have a Warpath to quickly travel around the map, which is also awesome for our build because we are using Disallowing Vessel. This one does actually not trigger when running around with Warpath, it counts as standing still. Which means once we run into the next mob area, we already have all of our Disallowing Vessel points up. Then for movement we're also using Wings of Ishmir, expending some stamina points to jump around, which also does buff our damage. Then we're also getting a damage buff from Flight of Gavanir. And we're mostly only using Juggernaut for bosses who have a huge downtime. For example, the one that shoots the laser, he disappears for some times and then comes back up, which means he's not hitting us, which means we regenerate force shield. But yeah, once we then use Juggernaut, we empty it all, which means we get our additional damage from Beacon or For the Lost. In the future I will do an update on my advanced guide, since we have so many more passive nodes and there have been quite a lot of additions on the passive nodes with additional damage, which they don't really state, so yeah, I will then do a guide about that. Share my knowledge of which passive nodes actually have additional damage, because yeah, the phrasing in the game is extremely bad. For example, residual energy doesn't even say it's additional damage, but Undertaker does. And residual energy scales with total attack damage, not with spell damage. It's very weirdly phrased for sure. Like I said, this build is focused around killing bosses without the need of having to drag minions next to the boss. And when they die, they also combo it with Mark of Impurity, since those deal then damage, maximum health damage, and that damage can crit as well, which means it usually just one-shots bosses. It's not the fastest, but it's also consistent, like we always have a time of 4 minutes. Since we don't need to roll the perfect map, we can clear everything very efficient. But yeah, that's it for me. If you appreciate the Wolcen content, leave me a like, also subscribe for future Wolcen content. Like I said, the next one will be the updated advanced guide. Since we also got way higher scores, I gotta update the soft cap when they start to fall off. And as always, this build will be available on our community webpage as a written version, with summarization and pictures for easy and quick reference. I'll see you in the next one. Servus YouTube.